Welcome, everybody. This is Netta Pitt. I'm the host of the CISOs Current, a CISOs Connect podcast. Today, I am honored to have the conversation today with Colin Anderson. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Dayforce. It's a global human capital management technology company. That's a mouthful, but with extensive experience leading cybersecurity at scale, Colin is known for his thoughtful approach to building high trust security cultures and aligning those cultures and that security to the strategies for the business. He brings deep insight into managing human-centric risk, fostering cross-functional partnerships, and driving secure innovation in rapidly evolving digital environments. So, today we have the honor of picking his brain on, how do we do this and how do we manage, the difference in and the people side of cybersecurity? Because without the people, we are just a bunch of tools, and it's really the people in the process that get us to where we want to be. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Colin and let Colin have any words before we jump into the questions.
I love the comment there about it's all about the people. You can have the best strategy on paper, but it's just a piece of paper unless you have the people to execute it. So I love that concept. So great point.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's just jump right in because I think we're both very passionate about how people play important roles in cybersecurity, and also how that really makes or breaks the organization from a security posture point of view. You've led major security teams across major organizations. What lessons have you learned about building that strong culture, and how do you, we all, love to stay at our positions, but, occasionally we move on and we have to build a new environment or enhance new environment. So what lessons have you learned? What items have you learned that helps you align that strong security culture to the business?
Yeah, this is going to sound kind of corny, but security culture starts at the top. If you don't bring your other executives along on that journey, helping you set that tone, helping you emphasize that this is core to our business, your awareness efforts, that culture, it's going to just be like pushing a boulder up a hill. It is so important to bring other leaders on that journey with you for building that culture of security, that awareness culture, demonstrating how cyber connects with the business values, business goals. It goes so far in helping just create a very easy runway for your current program, or as you're building out a new program. It is really aligning at the top, setting that tone at the top, and it makes everything a lot easier.
That's awesome, Amy. And I think, that's one of those key items is when we're, talking to our executives, and we have to make sure that they have that same buy-in, that security is not something that we have to do because it checks the box for compliance. It really is a business enabler. And if we look at it from a business enabling point of view and cascade that down, that changes the whole kind of tone for security in an organization. So I love that approach. Thank you.
It does. Let me add to a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And the funny thing is, so I've worked for like 3 large publicly traded organizations and a CISO for each of these in my career. And every one of them talks about being customer focused, and so aligning the business or aligning cybersecurity to the business is really not that difficult, because cybersecurity is all about protecting that customer trust. So if as a business, if you value that customer, cybersecurity helps you, is that insurance that to make sure that you're protecting that customer trust. And so it's funny, like, it's really a lot easier than if you just kind of break it down and understand what's your business trying to accomplish. If customer trust is there, then cybersecurity is really, a key enabler of that.
I 100% agree. I mean, I think half of our jobs, Colin, are making things simple, right? And sometimes we try to make things very complex, and sometimes things are very complex. But to your point, if your business is about the customer, and then and cybersecurity is about customer trust, those two are intrinsically linked, right? And you can't have one without the other. So really, really well said. Great point.
Yeah.
So the other question I have is, at Dayforce, with its focus on workforce solutions, right? How do you approach the intersection of cybersecurity and human capital, right? Especially in terms of insider risk, privacy, employee enablement, right? Like, we all know we have a litany of things that are coming into our environment, right? Whether it's IoT, whether it's AI, whether it's SaaS applications, whether it's, new products that people want to try out, new hardware, whatever. How do you help manage through that from a human capital point of view, and really kind of helped the organization understand what risks that could pose, how you can do things, but you have to have some guardrails around it. Talk to me about how you approach that.
Yeah, no, it's great question. And actually, it's a little bit easier here at Dayforce than it was in my previous roles. The nature of our business, there has to be a strong link between our SaaS platform, which is all about human capital, and cybersecurity. Um, you might be surprised. I mean, our key customer are often leaders in the HR function, and you wouldn't think that HR leaders are cybersecurity is high on their priority list, but that's changing. The reality is threat actors are going after people with access to sensitive information. Your HR team in every organization out there are those individuals that have access to sensitive information. So cybersecurity is more critical to that buying process than it ever has been. So
Mm-hmm.
that tying that link, in the human capital management space between what the business is trying to accomplish and the product that we're providing in cybersecurity, it's easier than it's ever been because cybersecurity is now part of the buying process. I have payroll leaders, HR leaders, chief HR officers wanting to know about our cybersecurity posture and our processes because it's critical to their buying decision. So easier than ever it's ever been. In my previous roles in retail organizations, it was a little bit more difficult, to tell you the truth. But I love the fact that actually the link is there and it's so easy. Um, but you brought up insider risk. That's an interesting one. That's coming up a lot lately. I think it's probably partially because it's in the news. North Korea, the fraudulent worker thing. Everybody's kind of talking about what's happening there. But the reality is everybody has to have some sort of insider risk program because your employees are probably your greatest risk. Mostly it's because they make mistakes. Sending information to the wrong individual, or humans. We make mistakes, and so usually your insider risk program is primarily focused on helping humans avoid those mistakes, and maybe that disgruntled worker leaving your organization with some sensitive information. Now that's changing a little bit because now we're having more potential situations where you've got intentionally malicious individuals, maybe hired by a competitor, a foreign government, trying to steal trade secrets or information. It's kind of changing the context of those insider risk programs. And so at Dayforce, we've had an insider risk program, but the last year, with all that's going on in the ecosystem, or specifically with North Korea, we've had to really look at that, revisit it, and say, okay, how do we change our interview processes? How do we change our background check processes? How do we change our monitoring processes? What type of signals are we looking for to potentially identify an employee that we've got some questions about? So it's one of those things that has to evolve with the threat landscape, because the threat landscape certainly continues to evolve.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love to make sure that we keep this not super techy, but when it gets to the point of talking about that insider risk, UEBA has become so much more important, just to be able to level set on what's normal activity, right? And again, you're saying we are working at a breakneck speed. Businesses are working at a breakneck speed. Security is working at a breakneck speed, and the amount of information that is coming at security teams to understand and parse through to say, is this normal behavior? Is this abnormal behavior? What have you is key. And the other part of that is, I mean, that's that technical throwing in a tool at the, but it's really about process, and people and process are the biggest connector in that, right? And so talking about how do you build your processes right from a point that reduces friction, because that's going to enable the business. It also makes sure that no one goes around the process, because it's a hard process. Not that that ever happens in organizations.
No, never.
No, never happens. But how do you work with your stakeholders and your organization and the executives at your organization to understand how people and process are at least in my view, and I'll love to get your take on this, are probably the most important part of it, and the tooling is the tertiary part, right? That helps us do it faster. But if we have a broken process and we don't, and the people don't understand what the process is or don't like the process, we're just going to do bad things quickly, right? So, give me your thoughts on how you kind of work through that and help, your organization understand that those two are key in driving security and the security culture.
That's a great question. Great question. And we're all engineers, and we do get caught up in the shiny new thing. People do like new toys, new tools. So it's really easy to fall into that trap and say, "Oh, I'm going to buy this new tool and it's going to solve all my problems." But you're absolutely right. You have to start with the process and how people play in that process, because people are usually designing that process. People are usually helping drive that process. Even with everybody talking about AI and AI agents, the human is not going to be removed from the process. Now there might be more automation in it, but we're not replacing the humans here. So it is really, really key, and we have to start with understanding, what are our goals? How are our processes currently aligned to achieve those goals? And then look at tools to help us, because you want tools that can help automate a process, make that process more efficient. But you're right. If the process is flawed, tools aren't going to save you. You're just going to, make a mess of it. You're probably going to waste a lot of money, waste a lot of time, when the reality is your underlying process is what's holding you back. And fixing the process is often not as easy as it sounds, because the process often will include other stakeholders. It's usually you're working with other teams, or you're moving data, or you're pulling data in, you're analyzing it, you're sending something. It's the process can have a lot of different touch points and a lot of different other humans and teams in the flow, which just adds complexity. And certainly, if your goals are not aligned, then there's a lot of opportunities for that process to break down.
Right, exactly. And that it's funny, because I started my career in process reengineering, so my brain just constantly goes to process, and my team sometimes are like, why do you always start with process? And I'm like, again, if we throw something to automate a bad process, it's just a quicker bad process, right? And so let's look at the process and make sure it's working. But to that point, right? You are constantly, any CISO is constantly, you know, influencing and trying to influence other parts of the business, right? And we're always doing that without authority, right? I mean, we would all love to be able to be like, no, you just have to do it. That never works, right? And so, how do you build that trust? How do you work with those teams to get them to understand that you know, for the longest time, I think security has been the somewhat organization of no, right? But we're changing that, right? We are looking at it from a
Yeah.
business point of view. We are trying to be enablers and partners. And so, walk me through how you go about doing that, Colin.
Yeah. It's a great point because the reality is CISOs are often accountable for security across the enterprise, but you're going to have a lot of different individuals that are responsible for pieces of it, And so I'm not a big fan of racy models, but it does work here a little bit, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. I'm accountable for security here, but there are certain leaders outside of my chain of command that are responsible for pieces of this. And so having those good relationships, having good communications, like recurring touch bases, just like put structure in place to ensure that the relationship and the communications are there. And then, making sure you align on the goals, because my goals and another leader's goals may not be, or almost never completely aligned. Security is maybe never going to be their number one, but as long as it's in the top three, I'm good. As long as we're kind of somewhere in that range that it's important to them just as it's important to me, we can find a way to execute. Probably the best example of that is we're a product company, so we have to design and bake security into our products. It's foundational to what we do. It's like this security by design mindset. But I don't own the developers. The development organization reports to a separate line of leadership. And so I have to influence. I have to work to help prioritize. I have to work to get more Scrum teams, more development teams focused on different aspects of security. And that's, the relationship building and communications piece. But I have to work with those leaders to make sure that security is a top priority for them as well. I mean, they have customer commitments and their feature commitments that are also important to them. But security is the most critical non-functional requirement that they have to keep in mind. And so it is, you approach it with a positive mindset, you build those relationships, make sure the communication channels are open, you work to set priorities, and I think collectively knowing that security is important to everyone in the organization, because it kind of, again, it starts at the top down in terms of messaging. We find a way to together, and their goals are met, my goals are met, and we deliver a really good, secure product to our customers.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, it's all about like constant negotiation and compromise, right? I mean, I I always try to walk away from, if neither of us got everything that we wanted, we probably did a great job, right? Because at the end of the day, whoever I'm talking to, there's a give and take, right? And it's usually on the development side or the business side, time, right? It's going to take a little bit more time. We're going to try to go as fast as we can. And, from our point of view, is we're not going to get all the controls because it's never going to be perfect, right? And so, there's a saying, perfect is the
Enemy of good enough.
yes, enemy of good enough, right? Exactly. And sometimes, and that's hard for security people, I think, sometimes, to understand. Because again, and again, I would love your take on this. Security is really a constant improvement, right? We set a bar, and okay, we've made that, we've compromised to get to this bar, and now we're slowly trying to move up, right? And get to a point where it's just about constant improvement, constant improvement of the process, constant improvement of visibility, constant improvement of mean time to detect, mean time to respond. Those are what we're constantly working on, and we're just slowly tweaking to get better every day, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So there is no finish line for cybersecurity. I talk with my executive team, I talk with my board, and we're working on, like, we're constantly investing more, and it's like when is it enough? I'm going, well, there is a point of diminishing returns, but we're constantly having to raise the bar because the threat landscape, the threat environment isn't staying static. There are new technologies, new threats. AI is dominating a lot of conversations right now in terms of how is that going to change the threat landscape. So it is one of those things that where you are constantly driving improvement, but sometimes there's step changes. There's the gradual improvement, but every now and then, a tool or a process or maybe an investment, or even sometimes it's one person can make a difference. You do that step change. All of a sudden you're building better code because you integrated a new tool or a process into the development cycle, and all of a sudden that's a step change improvement. But you're constantly trying to strive to be better because our attackers are striving to get better and better. And so you cannot rest on past success. You have to continue to drive and be paranoid, be uncomfortable that you're not doing enough, or you're not, because that being uncomfortable or paranoid is going to push you to do more and be better.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. Our adversaries, right, are always looking to improve, right? And they're using AI just as we're using AI, right? And they're using, ransomware as a service now. I mean, crazy things that you never thought would happen, right? They're using those as services. So it is become a business for them. It's always been a business, but it's become and taken on much more of that business mindset for them. And the saying that I have, and I usually tell my team, I'm like, unfortunately, we are in the game where the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right all the time, right? And that's a high pressure environment, right? And so if we go back to that human capital kind of conversation, how do you keep your teams positive? How do you know, because it can be a daunting task, right? When you come in every day and you're like, and we're back at the fight again, and we're tackling some of the same issues, and it's the same adversaries, or are we doing enough? How do you keep your team positive? How do you keep your environment? And when you're talking to the executives, how do you keep them engaged in, like you were saying, we're constantly having to move the bar up?
Yeah, no, it's so with my team, it's celebrating successes. There's a lot of things we can focus on, all the things we haven't done yet, and we do. Setting our goals for the quarter, setting our goals for the year. We're kind of focusing on where are we moving, trying to move the needle. But you have to celebrate your successes. You have to look back, like, what did we accomplish the last 6 months, or what customers did we win because cybersecurity was part of their decision criteria, and we were able to demonstrate the strength of our program. So the more you can kind of show how cybersecurity is helping the business grow, grow that top line revenue. ABC, always be closing, right? Even the cybersecurity part of that sales process. So making them feel connected to the business, celebrate those successes, be positive. We all make mistakes, and sometimes, something's out of our control. We have a denial of service attack. Well, the speed in which we detected it and responded to it and mitigated it is like so much better than the last time. That is success. We have another type of attack. How quickly we are able to address it, mitigate it, avoid a business impacting event. That's success. And so you kind of take those wins and keep people like pumped and motivated. With my executives, it really is about where we're growing as a business. We want to grow. We're growing in large enterprise. We're winning customers that have 100, 200, 300, 800,000 employees, like large enterprise. We're growing into the public sector, very high security bar, and so we cannot be successful in those markets without a strong cybersecurity program. So that's how I'm kind of driving the story with my board and my C-suite, because in order for us as a business to grow from 2 billion to 5 billion in ARR, we have to have a cybersecurity program that can take us there and win with those customers. So it's trying to, again, connecting cyber back to the business. That's really what it is about.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, so we're going to wrap up, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to, because none of us have unlimited time, and we all try to, read the preface and get to the ending and see what we learned, right, as quickly as possible. So, with that said, what are the 3 takeaways that you want somebody who's listening to this or only has, a few minutes at the end to take away from, our conversation today, to take away on the direction that, the CISO role is going and how it's enabling the business?
Yeah. The first one is the modern CISO is first and foremost a business leader that just happens to have a domain of cybersecurity expertise. You cannot be a technical CISO lost in your world, focusing on risk in a vacuum. You have to be that business leader linking cybersecurity to the business goals. Don't lose sight of that. Without that, you're not going to have a seat at the table. You're not going to be viewed as a business leader. You're not going to be, in the room where it happens, as we all learned from him. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, and I touched on it earlier, it's the tone at the top. Bring in other leaders. I'm fortunate to have a CEO and a C-suite that gets it. They know how important cybersecurity is to us and our business. Without customer trust, we don't have a business. So plain and simple, if we can do 9 things right, 1 thing wrong, and the customer's only going to remember that 1 thing wrong. It's the stakes are pretty high, and in order to be successful, you need everybody helping. Security is a team sport, as they say, and to make it a team sport, you need that tone at the top. So really work to win the hearts and minds of other executives and help them amplify your message. And last but not least, be positive. Being positive is momentum building. It's, if you go into this like, Chicken Little, the sky is falling, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Be positive, be pragmatic. Good enough is the enemy. And perfection is the enemy of good enough. So like sometimes it's good enough. Let's move on. So being pragmatic, being positive, I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're positive, your team is positive, and that goes a long way.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, again, those are items to take with you anywhere, right? You can apply them across your life, and I think that's super important. I really, really appreciate the conversation, Colin, and it was great having you on. I learned a lot, which is great. I mean, if you can learn, something every day, you're on the win column. So thank you for that. Hopefully, we'll be able to have you back on and talk about other topics that are important to the CISO organization as a whole. But thank you again, Colin.
Well, I'd love to come back anytime. I'm a huge proponent of CISOs Connect. I love what the team does. It is for CISOs, by CISOs. I love the mantra. Happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the CISOs Current, a CISOs Connect podcast. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.